Hello, and welcome to She Rises, the podcast where women in leadership take center stage. I'm Tiffany-O, your host and the founder of Virtual Partner, where we champion humanity in the workplace to build thriving organizations. With over 30 years of experience in change management and servant leadership, I'm here to bring you powerful stories, actionable insights, and inspiring conversations with trailblazing women who are breaking barriers and redefining success. Whether you're climbing the corporate ladder, leading your own venture, or looking for that next level of impact, this is your space to learn, to grow, and to rise. Let's dive in. So today I'm accompanied by the amazing Patrice Thornton. And just so you know, Patrice and we have worked together since 2016. I was a consultant with HRMS services. So without further ado, I'll let Patrice tell us a little bit about yourself, about HRMS, who you serve, and what is it that excites you about the work you're doing in HR.
Well, thank you, Tiffany, for having me today. I really appreciate it. Again, a wonderful introduction. Of course, as you mentioned, my name is Patrice Thornton, and I am the president and founder of Human Resource Management Solutions, HRMS. And my organization is really one of the things that I wanted to do some time ago to fill a need that I saw, especially with small businesses, and there were situations where they might have had the need for human resource expert, subject matter expert knowledge on various situations and even projects. However, they did not have the full-time need for it. So I started Human Resource Management Solutions with a specific goal in mind of being able to serve small and even medium-sized businesses, helping them with their human resource management issues. And so what that involves, for the most part, is being their ad hoc HR staff member, myself or even other team members, depending on the situation or size of the organization and industry. Another thing that I do, and I really like this part of what I'm doing, is working with organizations in customized training. Training is just so important. The opportunity for individuals, especially leaders, to be educated on best practices, be familiar with regulations and issues of a compliance nature when it comes to interacting with their workforce is so critical and so important. And so I'm able to do a lot of training with private and also public organizations. And a lot of it is the customization piece of it that I really enjoy, presenting, facilitating, and creating those things. So anything HR related, projects related to HR topics, as well as the day-to-day HR issues, is really what HRMS is all about.
Yeah, Patrice, I have to say you totally rock. I remember when we got together and you had gotten your licensing to facilitate the Workplace Excellence Series for Anne Arundel County in Maryland and Baltimore County, Baltimore City. You got that licensing and you were like, you know what? I'm not an army of one. And you built a solid team to be able to move those topics forward in state and local government. So I want to dig into your experience a little bit around some of the trends you're seeing. I think there are a lot of people in the public sector space. But when we start, in the private sector space, but when we start thinking about public sector, that's a different beast, right? So can you talk a little bit about some of the trends you're noticing specifically when you get leaders coming through those programs? Because for you, you're not just training individual contributors, you're facilitating training for executives and state and local government. So what are some of the trends that you're noticing in state and local government that can help us get ahead of sort of where we need to be anchored in 2025 around leadership development?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tiffany. And I would say one of the things that I see more in the public sector than I see in the private sector is just the size of organizations of that nature and the age of organizations of that nature. There are just some specific challenges that are intrinsic to that particular industry or type of it, the environment, the culture. Cultural change is really important as we live in a diverse community, a diverse world. There is the need to be adaptable, to move quickly. I'll just give you an example, like COVID-19 was a situation where everybody had to move and pivot quickly. That is not easy for organizations of the size of governmental agencies or even that age. They're not accustomed. They're accustomed to things being a certain way for a long time and nobody challenging, or even when there are challenges to making things better or doing something different, there's a lot of resistance and there's just a lot of bureaucracy associated with that. COVID-19, though, was interesting in that there was no question, there was no discussion. There were things that had to be done and they happened immediately. So that tells me that it can happen, right? When push comes to shove, if there has to be major changes and they have to be done quickly, we're capable of doing it. However, outside of major issues like that, I find that in the public sector, it just doesn't happen. And it takes a while to get people's head wrapped around things that are for the betterment of the organization, especially if things have been going a certain way for so long and the status quo is acceptable. So that's one thing that I've seen as a trend, a long-term trend in the public sector.
So,
Another thing, go ahead.
yeah, so what I'm hearing, let me just make sure I'm getting this. Change agility is a challenge, right? The change happens, things happen at the speed of change, but our people, unless it's death, like COVID-19, the face of death, that doesn't move. People aren't moved and aren't enabled to be able to keep up with the pace of change unless it's something like COVID-19. Is that we, and that if we can embed or create a culture around change agility, it would help the current workforce be better, more innovative, and adapt. Is that what I'm
Exactly.
hearing? Is that what you're noticing?
Exactly.
Okay.
And like I said, the thing about COVID-19 shows us that it can happen, right?
Mm.
It did happen. But yet, other than that, and what I've seen having gone back to, our environments, post COVID-19 pandemic period, that is, I mean, it's still there, but the pandemic piece of it, that things have gone back to the same thing. For example, when we talk about that change is even requiring certain topics that leaders, a person in a leadership role having the serious responsibility and even to some extent can become a liability to an organization if those leaders are not educated properly on certain topics. And so in the private industry, oftentimes what happens is that sometimes when there is an edict or something that's changed, it's like, hey, this is now a requirement. Like, for example, a lot of organizations, when things happen with the sexual harassment topic, it became a requirement. Just had to, right? Dollars talk, right? So when there's lawsuits and that sort of thing, it's like, hey, we need to educate our leaders. But outside of those situations, again, liability issues or life and death issues, then certain things aren't required and it may not happen. So I just think if we can look differently and think differently about how important training and education is on other areas that are not necessarily life or death, I think it would mean, some serious improvement in what we're seeing in leadership.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing that. Those insights are valuable. I'm curious what insights you have as you think about the role that women have in the workforce today that weren't prevalent before. Are you noticing that with some of the executives coming through? Are they talking about some challenges, or are you noticing from an HR leadership perspective, some challenges women face in the workforce, maybe that they didn't have before, that if as organizations are thinking about training topics for 2025, 2026, what should they be thinking about?
On the topic of women, I just think that my perspective is such, of course, I'm fortunate to be in a position, having started my own company and being successful at that, working with other dynamic women such as yourself. And so it's really nice to see that. And I definitely see growth over my almost 30 years in the workforce and also in a leadership role and being an integral part of progressive organizations. I've seen that. Can we do better? And is there opportunity for continued growth and improvement? Absolutely. But I'm fortunately enough to be able to rub shoulders with some really dynamic women, and I'm just really proud of what I'm seeing.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so think about one of those women. What is it about her that you can share with the next generation coming up? So if you think about like some qualities that make for successful women in the workforce, and since you've been a successful woman, a female leader, what are some things that you would pass to the next generation for them to embrace, for them to be effective leaders?
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good question. And I will say off the top of my head, one of the things I can think about is, quite admittedly, I'm not sure about you or those who are listening, but I know I had to be honest with myself in a leadership role and realize that sometimes, as hard as we work and as smart as we may be and as deserving as we may be to be in some of those roles, sometimes we're insecure about it and we're second guessing ourselves and we're like, I can't really believe and what's going to happen. We're just so insecure. That's just the only word I can think of, and maybe even sometimes timid about how we go about getting things done, even when we're in a position to make those things happen. So what I have found, and I have to admit myself early on in leadership role, I realized that we are somewhat intimidated by, or somewhat, sometimes I get, well, maybe that's the worst, intimidation is not it, but I think that sometimes we don't have the confidence that we need to have
Mm.
to bring other women up, to ask or
Ooh.
demand for them, because sometimes we're like, I'm barely here, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, I'm not really even sure of my footing. So sometimes when we have other women that we see, my feeling is, and my observation has been, that sometimes we're not as much advocates for them
Mm.
as we should be. I'll just give you an example.
Mm.
So if we're in a situation and somebody's working really, really hard and they deserve a higher compensation, sometimes we're timid about it because we're just happy that we have the compensation we have. Sometimes we need more. We don't even fight for our own
Mhm.
additional compensation. So sometimes we don't advocate, where I see our male counterparts have no problem doing that.
Mm.
And so I would say to other women, when you're working with other women and you're bringing them up, be confident, be advocates for them, be advocates for yourself first.
Mm.
And that's one thing that I've noticed, that I've had to recognize and be attentive to, even if it's happening subconsciously.
I agree with you. I'll never forget, Patrice, when I became a vice president, a corporate vice president, a vice president in corporate, and that I'm calling this like finding your voice,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's about voice, it's about courage, it's the confidence that you need to lead. But I'll never forget, I was picking up the phone calling a mentor who had previously been in my role. And I had a game plan, right? I had I created the 3 year roadmap. We were solving a problem. I knew I needed a team. I didn't have one at the time. And I remember calling her and saying, "This is my game plan." And she says, "Why are you calling and asking permission to do that? Like, this is what they are paying you the gazillion six figures to do. You don't
Exactly.
need to ask permission to do it this way. This is the way. And
Mm-hmm.
you are the beacon for them. That's why you are there. So do your thing, girl." And
Exactly.
I'll never forget that, to your point, sometimes other women, when we notice another woman tinkering, we need to bolster her up and remind her of why she's there, to help her silence that voice and to help her recognize your inner voice is telling you a lot of crazy stuff right now. Shut it down.
Shut it down.
Shut it
Exactly.
down. Right? Stand in your greatness and do your thing. So and after that, I'll never forget, I moved differently. My flow was a lot different after I didn't notice that I was behaving in this way. But the fact that I was calling her, I was second guessing the plan that I put together. And
There.
she's like, "That's a monster plan. You need
Right.
to go, that's a surviving
Exactly.
plan." So you're right. So
But that
finding
insecurity, that lack of confidence sometimes is there. and that voice might be louder than it should be. We want to stay in humility, right? But at the same time, understanding we're in that role for a reason. And when we're not confident in ourselves, sometimes when we see the opportunity to help someone else, we kind of squash it. And so that's one of the things that I pass on to other women. I make a point of saying that the men, they have no problem with speaking up. And if the answer is no to something, then they're okay with it. But let's not be too timid and have that, as you said, courage to get what we need, get the resources we need. Sometimes it's not just compensation. It's sometimes we need additional resources. Sometimes we are growing an organization. I remember being in a situation when I'm growing an organization and I'm still doing all the work, but I'm growing the organization so I can justify more staff, but I'm thinking I have to do everything. And so it just manifests itself in various ways. And so when we can recognize it and be okay with the fact that, yes, we're in that role for a reason, and roll with it.
Yeah, I love it. Something I want to make sure we really crystallize for those that are listening or those that are watching. And that is, Patrice, you mentioned advocating for others. And I heard another woman put it in the terms of sending the elevator back down for someone else.
Exactly.
Once you get there, make sure that you are proactively identifying top talent that are women that you're going to not just mentor, but you're going to sponsor, right? And advocate for. So that was one. And then the other call out you just made, Patrice, was around delegation, effective delegation, not feeling like you have to do it all, right? Surround yourself with really smart people and then delegate to them, let it go. I heard another woman recently say, the having power, to be powerful, you must give your power away.
Yes.
And not feel like you have to do it all. So thank you so much, Patrice, really for calling that out for us and reminding us. Okay, so we talked about government entities and what we're seeing in terms of trends in leadership. We talked about what women are experiencing in the workplace today. And really some of that we've seen some movement and progress, but we still are struggling around the themes of courage, finding our voice, and empowering other female leaders. I'm curious, Patrice, as you think about your journey and your role in providing training and development, what pieces are missing in leadership development, whether it's for the public sector or the private sector?
Another good question. I'm going to go back a little bit on, and I don't know if this is too far back, but I will say this. I feel that even in our educational system, even like our secondary education in this country, it doesn't align with the skills that are needed in the workforce. I just feel like there is a big skills gap, and that there are, again, antiquated learning methods and methodologies, and even topics that don't resonate with what's necessary in the workforce. And I think it's taken a while for us to get there. So, I mean, there are just certain topics that are just we would do well to see in secondary education, to start preparing young people for the workforce, to have the skills necessary to be effective workers. And then in time, they would be leaders. So I just go back really, I don't just start with a person who's in the workforce and how we develop them as a leader. I'm thinking we need to go back to secondary education to start off at the period where they're the best learners. I would even go back to, basic, primary education. But I just think that there's some things to make others successful members of society. And a big part of being a successful member of society is having a good work ethic. And so not just in the educational system, at home. I mean, we could be here all day talking about that, because I will say to my HR counterparts, or even just other leaders in the workforce, there's just so many things, core competencies, critical skills that are just missing, that really are the structure, the basic structure for leadership. So
wow,
that's that piece. So but I can go on and on about that, and that's a bigger.
I think this is a fundamental piece, because The reason that I stood up She Rises, and there's a survey that we launched last week at the National Conference for Women. The goal that I have personally, Patrice, is to shorten the leadership runway for women so that they're advancing through leadership in less than 10 years. And that cannot start, we say, from the door to the top floor. That's that piece of growth for them. But the preparation has to start, the runway to that needs to be before the front door. And so I've been having conversations, Patrice, with leaders around the country around how do we shorten that runway?
Mhm.
And I've been asking about the gap, and you just hit the nail on the head. It's secondary education, it's in the home, it's in high school. Those preparing them for you hit the nail on the head. So you hit ethic, core competencies around leadership, critical thinking skills. These are not the technical skills that you need to be an engineer or to build the widget or to make the website or to run the numbers as an accountant. That's technical. But what you're talking about, what we're seeing now in terms of what's missing, we have to address that way before they get to the front door. So thank you
Yeah.
very much for calling that out. That's boss right there.
And I'll just add one other thing on that. This is my little, maybe one day I'll do something with it. I think of career day in school, in high school.
Yes.
Career day is just in my mind, just should be a totally different experience.
Mm.
Because oftentimes when people are in, I think there's a piece of it where people might come in with different occupations or vocations or careers that might say, hey, here's an opportunity, maybe you would explore that. That is in no way preparation.
Mm.
So, for instance, when I had an opportunity, I did on more than one occasion have an opportunity to go to career day at the high school that I graduated with. And I said, well, I'm not coming here to talk to you about human resources. I'm here to talk to you about the things that you need to fill out an application, to apply for a job, the skills that you need, a mock interviewing, some of those basic skills that would help to be a little more than just one day a year,
Mm.
right? And just that those pieces, just to make them employable, to help them to understand the skill sets that's needed, the core competencies that are needed to be successful no matter what career they choose. And so that's my dream one day, that I might be able to talk to some educators about that, like having a career day or human resource professionals come and have a different type of career day and
Mm.
do it more than once and for hours, and not just so that's the thought. As to, again, that's why when you asked that question, I was like, okay, this fits into, again, prior to their first day on the job, what are we doing before they get to work?
Mm. So anyone that's listening, if that resonates with you, please reach out to Patrice and myself. Patrice, I think this is an excellent way to get some funding dollars and to work and to get some use cases, right? So, anyone interested in participating with Patrice on some use cases and really standing something like this up to help us shorten the runway for leadership and having a different look at how we're preparing young people for the workforce, please get in touch with Patrice. Patrice, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you on LinkedIn, or do you have another social media platform, or is it your website? Please tell us, how can people get in touch with you to talk about some of these, dig into some of these, or really put some meat on the bones around some of these topics with you?
Yes. So, yeah, I would say right now my LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach me.
Mm-hmm.
And on LinkedIn, I'm Patrice Thornton, as you can see it on the screen, Patrice Thornton. And I'm in Maryland. And I believe at this particular time, I am the only Patrice Thornton in human resources in the Baltimore, Maryland area.
Excellent. And of course, we're going to follow up this conversation. We followed up with a couple of shorts, so you'll see us on LinkedIn. Well, if you go to virtualpartner.biz, you check our blog out, you'll find a post about Patrice Thornton and what she does and how you can get in touch with her. So we'll make sure, if you're interested, please reach out to me. We want to make sure that we do something with this to change the lives of young people and our emerging leaders in the workplace. Patrice, this has been amazing. I really appreciate the time that you spent with me. But I don't want to interrupt. You said, Tiffany, I want to go back to something to answer the question. Was there something else that you would have added to in terms of skill gaps that are missing? Or was that sort of like you needed to go back to bring that forward?
That's what I meant. Yeah, I needed to go back to just bring us up to where we need to start with.
Excellent, excellent. Well, everyone, you have been listening in, tuning in to another episode of She Rises, is the podcast produced by Tiffany-O. And again, I'm the founder and CEO of Virtual Partner, where we transform organizations, empower leaders, and really try to inspire and reinvigorate humanity in the workplace. I hope you'll come back, tune in. And if you haven't taken the survey yet, for She Rises, and you'd like to contribute your voice to the first article that we're going to be published, or our first set of findings from our empirical research study, it's coming out for International Women's Month in March 2025. If you'd like to contribute to that, I'll make sure that the QR code comes up. Please scan the QR code, take our survey, forward it to women that you know. And if there's another amazing woman who has some insights and stories to tell, please recommend them to be a trailblazer on my podcast. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and I appreciate your time for tuning in. That's a wrap for today's episode of She Rises. I hope you found inspiration, insight, and the motivation to keep pushing forward on your leadership journey. Remember, success isn't about reaching the top. It's about lifting others as you rise. If you love this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other powerhouse women in your life. Follow me, Tiffany-O, and Virtual Partner for more resources on leadership, organizational growth, and creating workplaces where humanity thrives. Until next time, keep rising, keep leading, and keep making an impact.